Jer si milostivi čovekoljubiv Bog i tebi slavu uznosimo, Otcu i Sinu i Svetome Duhu, sada i u vekove vekova.
In a world of shadows and secrets untold, where primeval stories make the brave go cold, mighty gods on high and realms below, whispers of legends that shape each soul. And nightmarish dreams, cryptids lurking, nothing's as it seems, giants walking, angels and demons fight, only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time, the tales unfold, mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold, from valiant knights to buried treasure, this podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to myth, mysteries and majesty. Study with us, don't be a travesty. Theology, mythology, fantasy and horror, Dungeons and Dragons, Skyrim and Mordor. And Mordor powers haunt the evening, in gothic castles where they're screaming. Wizards cast spells in their towers tonight, exploiting enigmas hidden from our sight. Archaeologists make excavations deep of the ancient tombs where pharaohs sleep. In the dust of ages we chronicles keep, storytelling's power of monsters that creep. Myths, mysteries and majesty is the place for you to learn about this haunted space. From scholarship to manuscript crucibles, unlock the secrets of wisdom and gold.
Back in 2015, one of the best action RPG games of all time, at least in my humble experience, came to the scene. It was called The Witcher 3, The Wild Hunt, and for me, it's one of the best games ever made to this day. Why are we mentioning video game when it comes to this medieval / history / supernatural topic for tonight? Because the final boss in Witcher 3 video game was this guy called Odin Glass. And he was an elf and commander of an elven cavalry known as the Wild Hunt. And as its leader, he was known to most of the people as the king of the Wild Hunt. He was a high-ranking general in his world until he killed the king and became his successor. I would just like to share a few photos for people who like video games just as I love them, so they can see how that final scene was looking. So we see Geralt on the right side with a sword, and we see with even bigger sword, we see this elvish evil king who was the commander of the Wild Hunt on the left side with his even bigger sword. So when it comes to tonight's topic, we have to talk to this, to the identity of the leader of the army of the Wild Hunt. So we'll see there are different hypotheses, there are different beliefs, there are different traditions, there are different stories that come sometimes from pagan authors, but many times, believe it or not, you can find them in the sermons of the clergy people, sustained to this day in monasteries. So welcome to episode 138. We'll be again talking to the topic on the Wild Hunt and their leader, this mysterious figure. Shaun, welcome back. Thank you so much for being our most faithful, not just guest, but also co-host. When it comes to this topic and this book, what is it about it that you find it most exciting?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for introducing me to this book. This is, I mean, this book is amazing. Like, this is something I want to keep for or for reference, because I love so much to go back into history and to look at how things connect. And there's just so much about the traditions of the Indo-European people. And then there's like this direct through line that travels through the church as far as these kind of lower traditions that interestingly enough, were often repudiated by the church, but the people still held on to their beliefs. And these things actually persist to this day in popular culture, as you referenced with The Witcher 3, that game. But I mean, there's so many more tie-ins to this, and maybe if we get to it, I can bring up one of those tie-ins that, as I was reading, I was just like, now wait a minute, I know that from somewhere else, and I started tying these things together, and it's just interesting, and I think the audience will be blown away.
And for those who don't know, the leader of the Wild Hunt army is trying to get Ciri, and of course, Geralt, the monster killer, is going to stop him. Again, it's one of the best games, if not the best games, even though it's been uh, about almost 10 years ago or 11 years ago since it came out, 2014 or 2015. If you never played the game, if you didn't buy the novels written originally, it's a whole saga of like 7 or 8 novels written by a Polish author. Do yourself a favor and buy it. So we'll be continuing again with this book. I have included the Amazon link, Phantom Armies of the Night. And now we'll be dealing with the second part of the book. So before venturing further in our study of the Wild Hunt, we must remind ourselves of what distinguishes it from the troop of the dead and phantom armies. There are two fundamental texts to which we should refer, and two whole chapters are dedicated to each of these theories, each of these texts. We won't spend that much time to each of these chapters, but we'll mention the most important things because we want you to buy the book and study for yourself. The two narratives are akin yet quite different. Both are essential for considering the origin of the belief. The first one is the testimony of Walter Map, and we mentioned this gentleman last Friday. The legend of King Herla has made its way down to us through Walter Map, who was born in Wales between 1135 and 1140. In his The Courtier's Trifles, a document written between 1180 and 1186, we read the following. A king of the most ancient Britons, Herla, it is said, was interviewed by another king who was a pygmy in respect to his low stature, not above that of a monkey. I swear I'm not inventing, I'm just quoting what it says. This little creature was mounted on a large goat, says the tale, and might be described in the same terms as Pan. We all know about God Pan already, or we should know, especially because we can find some connotations with Caesarea Philippi, where Jesus went and transfigured, and he was going and saying where he would build his church and the gates of hell shall not prevail. This was the area of many false gods, including God Pan. Okay, he looked like a satyr, so a goat-like demon creature, but a bigger one. Okay. Pan was fiery red. His head was huge. I'm sorry. This little creature had fiery red. Looked fiery red, but his head was huge. He had a long red beard that reached to his chest. Shaun, you're getting there. I hope you won't turn into a dwarf, man, because we need you on the podcast. So his beard reached to his chest, which was gaily attired in a spotted fawn's skin. Okay, that's not too good. His belly was hairy, and his legs declined into a goat's hoofs. We should not attach too much importance to this depiction of a dwarf king. It is entirely borrowed from scholarly Roman literature and has no correspondence whatsoever with good luck pronouncing this, autochthonous elements. I think the meaning of this word is underground elements. We should note, however, that the Latin pygmaeus word was commonly used to translate the word dwarfs, and that King Herla is invited by a dwarf king who paid him a visit one day. According to the legend, pygmies rode rams and goats when they headed into battle with cranes. No wonder Tolkien found some of the inspiration in this, in this realm. It's such a beautiful yet a bit also creepy and mysterious fantasy world. We should regard this goat then not as mythological component, but as a symbol of the pygmy's nature, because in the entire body of medieval literature, this animal represents lost. King Herula found himself with his being who said to him, I'm the king over many kings and princes, and unnumbered and innumerable people, and I'm sent a willing messenger by them to you. I'm unknown to you, it is true, but I glory in the renown which has exalted you above other monarchs, inasmuch as you are a hero and also closely connected to me in place and descent, and so deserve that your wedding should be brilliantly adorned with my presence as a guest, as soon as the king of the Franks has bestowed his daughter upon you. This matter is already being arranged, though you know it's not, and the ambassadors will be here this very day. Let this be a lasting agreement between us. So now he's almost establishing covenant. We see something similar in the Old Testament. I shall first attend your wedding and you mine on the same day a year hence. With these words, swifter than a tiger, he turned and vanished from view. The king returned home, struck with wonder, received the ambassadors, and accepted their proposals. We know that's the end quote. We know that dwarves are, among other things, a representation of the dead who continue to live as they once did, thus retaining their social and familial organization. Their other world is not in the beyond. What we can take from this story thus far is that the principal reason for the dwarf's vision is to include a pact, but King Herla does not know exactly to what he commits. Several witnesses recount a dead man's visit to his surviving friend's wedding, and the pretext for the return invitation is sometimes the marriage that the deceased contracts in the beyond with a supernatural entity. I will skip some quotations and I'll read more, and then I'll ask Shaun to comment on this. This entire passage shows the wealth and power of the dwarves, stereotypes of medieval literature that nonetheless correspond to a well-established belief. The other world is full of riches. It is a veritable land of plenty, which is why so many heroes attempt to get there. In one final detail, we clearly see that the existence of a connection between dwarves and the dead. The visitors disappear as roosters crow. Multiple German testimonies state that the light of the sun petrifies dwarfs. They're chthonic, so underground, and nocturnal beings. Yet the term dwarf may be out of place here because the text tells us these visitors are as resplendent as lights, which should correspond more to luminous and helpful beings such as elves. We see that King Herla has plunged into a hollow mountain which contains several different areas, a dark no man's land which serves as an airlock, then the place where the dwarf's palace is standing. The life of the other world is different than that from ours. We can note that the gifts foreshadow the transformation of King Herla and his companions into hunters. Most important, the dog occupies a very special place. He belongs to the dark region. We can note in this that the time spent at the dwarf's realm is equivalent to several centuries, which means that King Herla or Herla truly visits the other world. And this detail confirms that the Hollow Mountain is a kingdom of the dead, a widespread representation in the Germanic world. And I'll stop here because I want to serve some of this material for the episode that we will be making in the future when it comes to the Hollow Earth. So this will be one of the probably small subtopics in that big episode about the medieval European view of the underworld and dwarves living there and what they represented. But Shaun, so far based on this introduction, we see that dwarves are not necessarily as lovely and meek and gentle, and I mean they're not gentle and nice always in Tolkien's writings, even in movies and the TV show that just came out recently. But at least in the works of fiction, we can see works of fiction when it comes to novels and movies and TV shows. At least we can see that you can make friends with them. You can go and eat and drink with them. But here in the lore, when we actually go to the stories and myths that predate Tolkien for centuries and centuries ago, we can see that while these things are still possible to start a covenant or relationship with them, we can also see that where they live, it's not a land of milk and honey. And you better not cross them because they'll make a covenant with you. And it's it's the land of the dead and the underworld. So basically, when it comes to this, to this information and the dwarfs we are used to see, what is it when it comes to your analysis? You can use your experiences, the former New Age, or you can use anything from the Bible or anything from the works of fiction as well.
Well, let's start with Tolkien so that way we can kind of bring the audience up to where we're at, because we're looking at all this stuff that's like, super old, but how can we understand, get from where we're at to where this stuff lies? And I think that if you look at Tolkien, you'll see it perfectly, right? So the Fellowship of the Ring, they're going to go to where the dwarves are, right? So they're outside, they're going to go down into the mountain, right? They first have to go through Moria, right? So they've got to go through this descent into the mountain, this dark place, this in between, what he calls an airlock. So this is a place between the two kingdoms. And then they finally get down there. And I mean, it's kind of like a little play on what's going on. Everyone's dead. So it's like, well, the dwarves represent the dead, but everyone's actually dead. And what's there in its place? A horde of goblins, trolls, and finally a Balrog. Right. So they were kind of lured in by Gimli, unsuspectingly. But I mean, that's the trope that they're pulling on, that the dwarf leads them there. So they're lured into this place with all the promises that they're going to be lavished with friendship from this king. They get there, everyone's dead. I just think that's funny. And then the next time we see the Fellowship going into a mountain, it's in Return of the King, I think, and that's where they're going down. So that way, the Aragorn can call on the oath of the people that had died there. And again, they're going down into the mountain to the place where the dead people are, right? and so it's just this. Tolkien was so like locked in with what was going on in these legends that he puts them in there. And then you're just like, oh, that's really good writing. And it is. But it's also really, really good folklore. So that's the first thing that I wanted to say specifically about the dwarf, the mountain, and the dead, because that just ties in beautifully. And all of our audience is going to be familiar with Lord of the Rings. And if not, shame on you. Go watch it. Not really. I mean, yes, really. But I take back what I said, the shame on you.
Yeah, the extended version, you better make sure that each movie is like 4 hours long, and you better watch them all day. One day, all 3 movies.
Yeah, if you haven't watched the director's cut, that's your penance. Go forth and sin no more. Then we get into this idea of having this contract with these spirits. So the dwarves here represent the dead, but they can also represent the things from below, or the spirits from the underworld. And yeah, they will promise you all kinds of things. They will promise you power, wealth, and of course, just like the dwarf did to King Herla, he promised him, or it wasn't really a promise. It was more of he was heaping up on him adulation and glory. Like, oh, you don't know me, but I know you, and I've been watching you, and we're descended from the same line, right? Yeah. That's not good when they start doing that, because what they're appealing to is your pride. And that is how these spirits will operate, especially from coming from the New Age perspective. You're going to get so puffed up with the pride. You're like, oh yeah, we can totally do this. And if anything goes wrong, remember everything he said. I'm so cool. Like, I can just get out of that. That's not how that works. You don't have any control over what's going on. And you'll find yourself in an entire different world of hurt where everything is turned upside down. And I mean, they will ruin everything in your life. Those types of curses are really, really hard to break. And it really takes coming to Christ in order to sever a lot of those ties. I've heard lots of testimonies from Roman Catholic priests because they deal a lot with the demonic. Not saying that the Protestants can't do that as well. Just Catholics kind of have it down to a science. And when they're dealing with curses and with covenants that people have made with these spirits, it's really hard to break them. It's not something that can happen really from the outside. The person has to want to come to Christ. And sometimes they can even strangle that want and make you feel like you're not worthy to come to Christ. And then you're kind of just stuck in this, well, I don't deserve healing. I don't deserve repentance and forgiveness. And that's a really tough place to be. And it takes a lot of pastoral care to bring that person back to understand, hey, this here is a demonic affliction. They're actually pulling on your heartstrings, trying to make you think that there's no coming back from this. And when we hear in the story of Hurla, and I don't know if you've got there yet, Nico, but when we hear in the story of Hurla, when Hurla comes back, it's like 200 years later, and like his people aren't even in possession of the island anymore. It's the Angles and Saxons that had come and taken possession of the island. So, even him coming back, like even when you can, it's not on your own terms. And then we see in the story that you can't even dismount. He can't even touch the ground. If he does, all of his years come rushing back to him. I'm reminded of that movie, The Spiderwick Chronicles, where the girl's father is taken away by I think they're the nymphs or the pixies. And so they go to find him, and they're asking him to come back so that way they can undo everything that's been going on with the goblins. And he says, I can't leave this place. If I do, all my years will come rushing back to me. I mean, it's like, wow, this idea of you being like captured and taken away and you can't come back because if you do, you will no longer exist. Man, I see this first in what we just read about King Hurla. And I'm sure maybe that pulls on older traditions too. But it's like, that's 1,000-year-old tradition. And then they put it in Spiderwick Chronicles, which was amazing. So yeah, that's just kind of my thoughts on the first story.
That was so wonderful. You gave us so many details. Okay, let's start with the dwarves. You were talking about the reason, or at least the main reason of them living underground or in the mountain. I would always think that they're there because they need, they're obsessed with gold, right? So it's in their blood to mine, right? So that's their job number one, to mine so they can survive, right? So can build places and they can trade gold with other races, and so on and so on. And in that, they became so good. They developed good tools, pickaxes. They'll be trading with other peaceful races, and this is how they'll be thriving and they'll be hiding, because it will be way more harder to penetrate a mountain than a forest. Well, if the elves lived on the top of the forest, that's a different story. But still, you can burn the forest. With a mountain, you would need something even bigger, more powerful than the dragon to destroy it, right? You need powers like tonic powers, like maybe earthquake or something like that, where one would be maybe, at least in their context, correlating natural disaster with spiritual forces that could be, causing something like this. So I liked listening and learning from you, because for me, again, dwarves will be always like, oh yeah, it makes sense. They're in the ground and they're in the mountain because they are looking for diamonds and for gold. And because they're so obsessed with that and with riches, that was like, for me, that was like, well, yeah, it makes sense. But now you're giving us, just like the author, and I always had problem pronouncing his French name, Claude Lecoultre, whatever. I think I'm getting close to his last name. But yeah, I think you're getting very close to what he's saying in this chapter, right? Chapter 8, that this is the reason why they're there, because they're not mere human race. They're like more of representatives of the dead, even though the folk tales and the oral tradition, of course, when it comes to anything in life, they're mixing. Sometimes they're evolving and changing. But at least when it comes to this aspect, I'm like, wow. So they're actually more spiritual beings and more, when I say dark, not necessarily evil, but there's something about them that doesn't, like, I don't know if you can fully trust them, of course. That's where I'm getting at. So I love this chapter, but again, I will save the best for the episode where we're dealing with the Hollow Earth. I'll just read a little bit more because it's interesting. So yeah. So when King Hurla was, coming out from the realm of the dead, from the realm of a dwarf's kingdom, some of his company, forgetting the Pygmies' order, who was the dwarf king, dismounted before the dog has alighted, and in a moment they fell into dust. Whereupon the king, comprehending the reason for their dissolution, warned the rest, under the pain of a like death, not to touch the earth before the lightning of the dog. And that's the dog that the king dwarf sent as a gift to escort King Herla out of the underground back to his realm. The crumbling into dust of several knights indicates they are dead and they can live only in the underworld. Here again, we're in the presence of extremely ancient beliefs, which maintain that death was not an ending, but the transition from one state to another. A person dies in this century, but he or she continues to lead the same life somewhere beyond the grave. Walter Mapp's tale includes this conclusion, and this is the quote. And the story says that this King Herla still holds on his mad course with his band in eternal wanderings without stop or stay. Many assert that they have often seen the band. Recently, it is said, however, that in the first year of the coronation of King Henry, the band ceased to visit our land in force as before. In that year, it was seen by many Welshmen to plunge into the Wye, the river or Hereford. So basically, King Herla and his men are considered hunters, not considered as hunters, but as an army. And their endless ride has nonetheless come to an end. Okay, so in this story, King Herla is the leader of this army. King Herla was not, at least we don't see in the text, he was not an evil man. We don't know everything about him, at least not from this book. But we don't see anything evil. So even in this portion of Europe, if this was their version of the Wild Hunt, the Army of the Dead, let's call them that way, it was not a bad one. I'm not saying it was a good one either, but it didn't seem as the bad one. And especially King Herla didn't seem as an evil king. So if this region of the world that's slowly, transferred to the Welsh region, I don't see how they would see King Herla as this evil ruler of the Wild Hunt. So basically, there are still pages left in this chapter, but I'm going to save it for the chapter when we're dealing with the Hollow Earth and all this hypothesis, because it's very interesting. So I'm going to leave the best for later. But Shaun, another question when it comes to this chapter. You mentioned spirits coming and telling someone like, "Hey, we've been watching you because we are from the same king, from the same ancestor." The whole book has to do heavily with the worship of ancestors, right? So my dad passed away. There's no way I'm gonna go and visit my mom and think my dad's spirit is there. And I'm gonna pray to him and say, "Hey, Dad, protect mom," or "Hey, Dad, bless the home," or whatever. I'm not going to do that, regardless of how much I love him. His body died, but he's not dead. So I'm not going to do that to his father, my grandpa, who survived World War II. I'm not going to say, "Hey, Grandpa, you were in the war, so now, let's say, difficult times are coming. You're my saint patron of the war and the defense, so you protect our home." I'm not going to do that. I'm still going to call upon the name of Christ and ask him to protect me and bless me. I don't owe anything to the ancestor, just as the same way as once when I pass into eternity, if I have any kids and grandchildren, they will not owe me anything to that in that regard. So I just want to say, because this book is heavily on ancestral worship, can we please put an end to this thing to say to people, if you're one of these and watching this, either now or in the years to come, and if you live in fear or superstition, you have to do this and to do this and to do that, to appease the dead, to feed them, to leave food remains in the corners, to say prayers, to bless them, to do this and this. No, you can't do anything for them. You can't. Don't try to feed them. Don't try to give them a drink. You can't. They're spirits. They can't. So can you please comment on this?
Yeah. So I actually have a few things. First thing I wanted to comment on was when you were talking about the dwarves having this preoccupation with gold, and that's why they're in the earth. I actually think that's pretty didactic, right? These are the dead that are down in the center of the earth, and they're preoccupied. They're obsessed with doing the things that most people are obsessed with in life, which is accumulating wealth. Even in death, they can't stop. That's their penance. They can't stop accumulating wealth. And it's to such an extent that it's an embarrassment of riches, right? Like, they have entire hoard rooms full of this wealth, but it's never enough, and they are still compelled to dig deeper. And
God, Shaun, imagine if God punishes you and me for a time being in heaven. Like, hey, you two were obsessed with books for a season, for an eon. You'll be collecting books. That's your punishment. We'll be like, oh God, please don't punish us. We'll be here. Yes. I'm sorry.
yes, here's heaven's library. Are you sure? Oh no.
Oh yeah, you want me to be there with dusty books? Maybe those books are not dusty. Maybe they're like in perfect condition. You know, like, oh, I have to be there far away from people and with books. Oh, that's so hard on me.
The second thing I wanted to mention is King Hurla's guide that was given to him by the pygmy. And I don't know if you've watched the movie Coco with the Hispanic boy that plays guitar, but his guard, or like his guide into the underworld, was a dog. And so it's like, you know, and even in, I think it's in Aztec folklore, one of the psychochomps is a dog, or a dog-headed creature. I think he's the brother of Quetzalcoatl, and I think it's like Xolocoatl or something like that. The dog Xolo whatever is, I think they're just called Xolo for short. They're the Mexican hairless dogs, and they're named after that deity. All right. So the third thing, ancestor worship. It was pernicious. It was cancer on early man. The idea that when somebody passed over, they could haunt you, they could hurt you. We even see later on in the book, and I don't want to give any spoilers, but we even see later on in the book this idea of people, when your child dies and is stillborn, that you're not even allowed to grieve for it. Because if you grieve for your child, they have to carry a vessel that has all of your tears in it for all eternity. And so it is a burden to them to grieve them. And so they don't give the child a name, and they don't bury it in the cemetery. They take it out to the vegetable garden, and they dig a hole for it and bury it there and sprinkle poppy seeds on it. Not because, oh, a poppy plant will grow, but because if they decide to come up to haunt you, first they have to count all the poppy seeds. It's this wicked, twisted idea that turns family upside down. The idea that you would have to worship your ancestors. You should be thankful for your ancestors. You should love your ancestors. Your duty, you do have a duty to your ancestors, and that's to live a good life, because they're the reason you're here. And your descendants will have a duty to you, and that is to live a good life and to carry on your name. That is what we do to show love and affection and gratitude for our ancestors. Is we carry on their name and we live a good life, as good a life as what any Christian can live. And I think most especially is turn to Christ, repent, and be saved, right? So your ancestors, even if they're in perdition, they would love to know that you were saved. Even if they hate everything, including themselves, I'm sure they would love to know that one of their descendants made it. And so, yeah, that's the duty that you owe to your ancestors, and nothing else. No worship, no sacrifices. We're not going to set food out for them. We don't offer them prayers. We don't do any of that, because we pray to the one who is above them. So I'm not going to pray to them. I'm going to pray to God and ask him to ensure that my ancestors are at peace. That's what I will do. I'm not going to pray to them, because they don't have any power other than what God would give them anyway. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you. So that was the first fundamental text for tonight. The second one is called, there's no way I can pronounce this Latin correctly, but I'll try. The Mesnie, M-E-S-N-I-E, Heliquin, which would be H-E-L-L-E-Q-U-I-N. So the Mesnie Heliquin. And this is the Orderic Vitalis's story. I'll read some portions. So here we're bumping into this monk, Orderic Vitalis, who lived in the 11th and 12th century. And here is one of the nice quotations from his book. I cannot ignore or remain silent about an event involving a priest of Lysiak's diocese on New Year's Day. The priest was named Balchalin, and he had responsibility for the Church of Saint Albin the Confessors, a former monk who became Bishop of Angers. On the night of January 1st in 1091, so the end of the 11th century, this priest was called out to attend a sick man, as was his duty, in an outlying area of his parish. He was coming back home through an isolated part of the country where he heard the kind of sound that it made by the passage of a great army. He assumed it was the personal guard of Robert the Bellamy, which made a hurried approach to the siege of Kersey, someplace. The moon shone brightly under the constellation of the Ram, and the road was clear. Bachelin was a young man, courageous and strongly built and adroit. But when he heard the kind of sound made by a rabble of soldiers, he became fearful. He remained there, uncertain whether to flee and so avoid being attacked and robbed by ruffians, or to stand his ground and defend himself. He noticed 4 medlar trees standing in a group some distance from the path, and he decided to hide in his little grove until the mounted horsemen had passed. But a figure of enormous size, wielding a large club, stood in his way, and holding the weapon over his head, the man cried, "Stay where you are, do not move." I should be an actor or something, I don't know. The tale goes on. The priest immediately stood still and supported himself on his staff. The grave figure who carried the club took up a position beside him without doing him any ill, and together they waited for the army to pass. Very interesting. The wood from the medlar tree was used for protection from enchantments. In the Vendee and in the Anjou, it was said that a medlar staff would put witches to flight. Likewise, in the Ain region, a branch of this tree on the ceiling of stables protected the livestock from evil spells. In this detail, we move far from the source legend and fall into the Christian exemplum. Bachelin saw among this group many of his fellow villagers who had died recently, and he heard them lamenting the fact that they were in torment because of their sins. So again, the author, for everyone who didn't watch the first episode, the author is a scholar historian, but his number one problem is that Christians have changed or interpreted many of these old tales and legends through the biblical lenses by seeing a lot of these spirits as demons and seeing a lot of these events basically coming where God would allow this to happen so that they will be warning people to come to repentance. So I do partially understand him, but on the other side, those clerics and monks who were telling these tales, changed tales, and used them in sermons, I believe they had only but good intentions, and it doesn't mean they did or said everything wrong. So I'm like divided. I understand both his passion and his frustration, but I also understand the monks and priests who were like, hey, you all know this legend because we're from the same region. You all know about this, leader of this army or these witches or these phantoms flying in the dark. Do you think they're not demons? Of course they are. So I also understand their heart. They cannot identify and find the proper word in this satanic realm and structure, to be perfectly correct. But it is a demonic entity. Let's be sure about this, at least for many of this, not every. Like in this story, Shaun, what would be your interpretation that as the army was passing, there was this large giant with a club that didn't even hurt the human. He just stood by there and almost made sure that the army won't hurt him. And B, certain parts, this forest that were of this tree, I forgot the name of the tree, the medlar tree, was known in that time and in that region to be protecting against witches and enchantments. So what can we say about this army and the giant who was protected like a gentle giant, and trees used for protection?
All right. So the first thing I want to say, I'm sorry. I do have to put a clarification on the last thing that I just said, because as you were talking, I realized that some people may take it the wrong way. When I said, do not pray to your ancestors, I was not condemning the practice of the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox who ask their ancestors to pray for them. That's a completely different thing. One is saying, hey, you also know where the power is. Can you put in a good word? The other is, I'm expecting you to have the power to do it. So I don't want our Orthodox and Catholic listeners to feel like I was trying to single them out there. I was not, and it didn't even occur to me until Nico started speaking.
Yeah, I think they're smart enough and know in the last 2 years that we are not like against Catholics or against Orthodox. So I think they should pretty much understand that was not your heart and that's not what you said. But thanks for the clarification.
As far as the giant wielding the club, so I'm reminded of there's a spirit that we talked about last time, the Celtic god Dagda, and he has the club, and with one side he can kill something, and then with the other side he can bring it back to life. So when I'm seeing this train of entities, which Dagda was kind of the head of the train of the wild hunt in the Celtic lands, and then I see a giant carrying a club, the first thing I think of is Dagda. But if you don't know Dagda, if that's not something that you're really familiar with Celtic mythology, something that you might think as soon as you see this is, oh, that's Virgil from the Divine Comedy, who's now coming to accompany the person who's going through. You know what? I remembered Virgil's name. I don't remember the name of the guy who. Oh, is it Dante? It might be Dante. Well, hey, you know what? We're gonna say it's Dante, and if I'm wrong, you can roast me in the comments.
And Dante cannot come back and sue you, so it's okay.
Yeah, and it's past his copyright anyway. It's only like 800 years old. Yeah, I'm assuming that it's Dante. Anyway, so Virgil, the one accompanying him, is the one saying, "Hey, look, do this. Hey, go do that. Hey, don't do that, because you could get hurt." So that's what I'm thinking. Is this is like his spirit guide that was sent in order to inform him of what's going on. And what did you say the second thing you were wondering was?
Well, the fact that they believe that the medlar tree was used for protection from enchantments, evil magic, not just for people, but also for the livestock.
Yeah, so especially in Germany, like, or in the Franco-Germanic area, there's a lot of that. That's like super common, like certain, or at least it was when the ancestors came over, because they brought a lot of those traditions to the United States. I mean, if you go to Pennsylvania, like Lancaster County, where most of the people who were from Germany and the Netherlands settled, they still have like different traditions of things that they use, and so. And they'll accuse them, like, you know, other outsiders will accuse them of witchcraft, and it's not witchcraft. It's just folk medicine that they learned that, hey, this thing in our superstition does this. But
Oh, my people have tons of them, and many times it differs, even though it's the same country, but it differs from region to region in the country, from town to town. And it's usually the old ladies who know these things. Oh, my grandma said, oh, my neighbor lady said this. No, this one says this. Oh, yeah, there's this, but also this. It's like, it's so many folk tales that you need whole libraries to fill them up. And also, maybe, I'm sorry for interruption, if you can touch on the question, for me as a Protestant, zealous Protestant, in the last 20 years, until God started changing me recently to be less judgmental, more open-minded. Do you think God would consider this a sin? Let's say whatever. Let's say I think my phone can protect me from the Mothman, right? So let's say I do pray to God, but I also put my phone close to me when I'm sleeping because it's supposedly I heard it can protect me, right? Do you think God will consider that as a sin? I mean, I know it's superstition, but is every superstition a sin? It's a difficult question because I wouldn't know what to answer. For me, back last 20, deduct last 5-6 years, the first 20 years of my Christianity, I'll be like, oh yeah, that's a sin. You should not do that. But now I'm like, but I don't know if I should be so judgmental and so black and white. I don't know. So what is your opinion on that? And plus, whatever you wanted to say, please continue.
yeah, so I don't think that that's a sin any more than me wearing this cross necklace is a sin, right? I'm not placing any power in it necessarily. I'm not saying that this is going to protect me. It's Jesus Christ that's going to protect me. This, I believe, represents Jesus Christ to me, that I can look at it and remember, oh yeah, Jesus Christ is there. And so the supernatural little things, especially if you're, or I'm sorry, not supernatural, the superstitious things. If you're looking at these things and assume that they just have this innate property that just hasn't yet been explained, then that's, I mean, that's essentially science. That's not you trying to place any eternal hope or love in the thing itself. So I don't think that that's sinful. Might be misguided, but it's not sinful. Now, if you were like, hey, the prayers to Jesus that you make won't work unless we do this, this, and this, now that's witchcraft. So you now cross the line into witchcraft. But if you're like, we're first going to pray, and then we're also going to do this thing over here that our people do, I don't see that as really being any different than rubbing Vicks on someone's chest. Like, yeah, Vicks can help to open airways, but people often use it for things it's not supposed to be used for. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just kind of the folk remedy that developed around that because it's such a common ointment. But
Oh, wait. Is that related to many evangelical ladies thinking that essential oils can cure everything? Basically, it sounds like that.
Exactly. Yes. 100%. Yes. If
you can't do this, you have a problem with this, essential oil, essential oil, essential oil. It should be a meme, essential oil, essential oil. It's like for everything.
Yes. If you think that my prayers to Jesus are not going to help unless I have a dab of lavender oil, that's witchcraft. So you need to repent. But if, hey, you should totally pray about this. And in the meantime, this thing also helps. That's not witchcraft. That is just taking advantage of what we know about the healing properties of certain substances. So yeah, one is medicine, and one is what do you call it? Medicine, like the primitive indigenous form of medicine. So do the one and not the other.
Okay, cool. And sorry for interrupting. I don't know if I'll remember later, or maybe later will be too late. So sorry for that. The second point of contact between Order Vitalis, this monk, and this chapter, and Walter Map in the previous chapter is the presence of dwarfs with large heads. Though the clerical literature sometimes depicts the dead as individuals who are the size of dwarfs, the motive of the large head appears only in the work of these two authors. We should not be surprised by the fact that the living may appear in the midst of the wild hunt, or as known by the other name, the infernal hunt. This is the sign of an imminent death, and this motif has a long history. I have to skip because we have so many stuff to say tonight. And this clerk, or Derek, now reveals his true design: to cause fear in order to inspire repentance. So again, the author of the book is a little bit upset, but he's like, oh, this clerk revealed his true motive: to cause fear in order to inspire repentance in the people who were alive and reading or listening to his sermons, letters, and messages of that time. Now we're switching to the end of the same chapter. I just want to read a few other things. The same clerk, or Derek, reveals his didactic intentions. Amend your ways, otherwise this is what awaits you. Robert's request for a 3-day silence, because before that we had the whole letter, which I don't have time to read, but the crucial sentence is the last one that says, do not tell of all that you have heard or witnessed or reveal it to anyone for the next 3 days. So this is why the author of the book continues saying that Robert, who is in this story, his request for a 3-day silence may surprise us, but it is fairly common for the dead to commend the living to respect some precaution, as if the encounter removes the living from this world, and a certain time should elapse before he sets foot back on it. In one of the stories by the anonymous monk of Byland, 14th or 15th century, the deceased states the following: keep your eyes on the ground and do not look at a physical fire for at least this night. and we have more and more stories. But basically, this is my question to you, Shaun, and of course, you can add more comments if you wish. Last Friday and today, this Friday, we mentioned some stories and individuals in these stories that, honestly, if we are very honest to ourselves, just because they look weird or they may be spiritual beings, they're not necessarily evil. They're not. They can be ancestors, they can be ghosts, they can be spirits, they can be different creatures for which we don't have necessarily names, phantasms and whatever. But like just like with that giant with a club in the previous story, and now in this one, we see that some of the dead, their intention is not to hurt you or deceive you. They can even come and warn you about something that is coming. Hey, avoid this or avoid that. Don't do this, don't do that at all, or in the last day, 2, 3, 5, 10, doesn't matter. My question is like, since God is sovereign and in the control of everything, and these spirits, if they're there for the time being or permanently, we don't know. But at least for that one period, for that one day moment, they appear to a certain individual, the living, and warn them about something that will come. And if they do not listen, something evil will come. I mean, how is that different than God sending an angel to warn you as a messenger and leave? So I have so many questions that I don't know if anyone can answer, but my mind is blown away by the complexity and depth of this spiritual realm that we don't know enough. We don't know. We usually, many of us churchgoers classify everything as, oh, God or Satan, demons and angels, and that's it. We have no categories for many of these beings. We wouldn't even know if you go to a regular church where they're like, oh, that's a demon camouflage, that's a ghost, or is the spirit of your dead ancestor, and he's here to deceive you. That's it. That's the best answer 99% of them can give. But my point is like the spiritual realm and the realm of the dead is so much more complex, so much more. If God wanted to tell us more, he would have, but he didn't. So my question is like, could these dead ones, the spirits of the dead ones who come to warn the living ones, and their prophetic warnings come to be true, then they're there to serve, to bring the so-called good news, not the gospel, evangelion necessarily, but the good news to warn the dead, to warn the living. The dead are warning the living. And they're there just to message them that they disappear. This is so similar to what we're reading in the Bible, that God would send angelic beings. How would we explain this, or maybe even ease the consciousness or anxiety to the Christians who are like, oh no, everything's demonic? What can you say on this topic?
Well, first thing I want to say, to maybe ease the consciences of some of our more fundamentalist brethren, is it could be a demon, right? Like, we freely admit that demons can disguise themselves as other things. We see that a lot in stories of demonic oppression where they appear as something else. So we freely admit that, yes, it's possible that this thing is a demon that is just cloaking itself as something else. But if its intention doesn't seem to be evil, and it's not hostile, and what it says comes to pass, and it's for your benefit, then I would say that you can regard this as a messenger. Michael Heiser said that angel or messenger is just a job title. It's not really descriptive of the species of the host of heaven. Right. Perhaps angel as messenger could be broadly applied to more than just the heavenly hosts. Could also be broadly applied to the righteous dead who are sent to give a message. This is just a job title, right? So is it an angel? Well, it depends in what sense. Is it an angel in the sense that it was sent to give a message? Well, obviously, because it sent you a message. Did the message come to pass and it was for your benefit? Well, then you should just thank God. Do not try to communicate with it, establish contact with it, pull out a Ouija board, light a candle, burn incense. None of that. We don't do that, right? So if God in his sovereignty wanted to send you a message and he chose the avenue through which you would most readily receive the message, then you give thanks to God and move on with your life. That was just an interesting thing that happened. We don't pull doctrine from it. We don't try to communicate with. We don't do none of that. In the same instance, if it happened to have been a heavenly host that came and disguised itself in a form that you would more readily accept, and then gave you the message, which is also totally possible. So you would never know if it was the dead or an angel. But you would have no way of knowing, because there's no way that we could try to disambiguate the two. All we can say is what it looks like. You also would not communicate with it, worship it, or anything like that, right? You would just say, "Thank you, God, for sending me this message in whatever form you sent it to me." We can't really know much about what's out there. I don't want to be the person who's setting up hard, fast rules and saying, "Oh, it's either this, or this." I don't know. What I do know is that if it's something that is for your spiritual benefit, then it's of God. And if it's not, then it's not of God. If it leads you to worship God, then it's of God. If it leads you away from God, then it's not of God. And so you have to learn how to test the spirits. Sorry, I stopped right as you were drinking water.
Shame on you. I'm kidding. We're only shortly stopping at chapter 10. I just want to read a couple of pages, not every word, of course. Angelic hosts and diabolical hordes. Ooh. Undeniable is the importance of the influence of the literature or revelations on the wild hunt. During the 8th century, a new theme appeared in the literature of revelations. Angels and demons fought over the human soul when it left the sleeping body to visit the other world. These battles between angels and demons seems to have popularized the idea of a celestial militia that comes in search of the righteous soul in order to bring it to God. A notion already firmly established in the Bible. Is it? Of a demonic horde that captures the soul of the impenitent sinner. I'm not familiar with these passages that he's finding. I also noticed this in the first part of the book, which we covered last Friday. He would occasionally say, "Yeah, this is biblical." I'm like, maybe it's part of our church history, but that's not the same as being biblical. You can say it's a huge part of Christian faith and tradition. I'll give you that, but it's not necessarily biblical. So I wish he's also a little bit more familiar with theology.
Well, if I may, what he could be thinking of, and just broadly applying it to those who pass away, is when I think it was Satan and Michael fought over the body of Moses, right? So maybe that's something that he's thinking of, like, oh, well, that just happens to everyone. Well, that's terrible hermeneutics. We don't do that in biblical studies. We don't say, oh, hey, here's an event that happened. That means just boom, everywhere. That's exactly what happens all the time. There are such things as exceptions to the rule.
And not to mention how much of anxiety that will cause to the living. Hey, I'm about to die. I'm not just afraid of death, and I'm also not afraid if I'll end up to be with God or not. But also, I don't know who will first come to me to snatch my soul. Will I go to the left or to the right? I don't know. No, that's like bad theology. The idea of the dead massing together into a group before the final transition is an extremely old one, and is described by the historian named Procopius. It's 2 pages, so I'm going to just read a little bit. They imagine that the souls of the dead are transported to that island. On the coast of the continent, they dwell under Frankish sovereignty, but hitherto exempt from all taxation, fishers and farmers whose duty is to ferry the souls to the other side. This duty they take in turn. Those to whom it falls on any night go to bed at dusk. At midnight, they hear a knocking on their door. I should be making audio sounds too. And muffled voices calling. Immediately they rise, go to the shore, and there see empty boats, not their own, but strange ones. They board the boats and seize the oars. When the boats are underway, they perceive that each is laden choke full, with her gunwales hardly a finger's breadth above water. Yet only they see no one, and in an hour's time they touch land, which one of their own craft would take a day and a night to do. Arrived at Brittia, The boat speedily unloads and becomes so light that the boat, dips only her keel in the wave. Neither on the voyage nor at landing do they see anyone, but they hear a voice loudly asking each one his name and country. Women who have crossed give their husbands names. And that's the end of quotation. In Brittany, the Bay of the Departed was regarded as the site from which these boats embarked. According to other traditions, between the moment of death and the time of body's Christian burial, the soul undertakes a journey to the place of personal judgment where its fate is determined while it awaits the last judgment. Again, not necessarily biblical. Rather, the judgment comes later, but I know there are also different interpretations, so I'll stop here. Quite often, the rite is given to St. James of Compostela or involves passage over St. James's Bridge because Santiago is associated with the Milky Way, which we talked about last Friday, as the road of the dead. See, now he gives 100 pages later, he explains what is the Milky Way. It was considered as the road of the dead. We should recall that the pilgrimage routes to Santiago de Compostela follow the Milky Way toward the Campus Stellae, the star field, in some town called Ariege and another one called whatever, Cosserans. I would assume these are French places. The Milky Way is called Path of Souls, which we can view in light of an ancient belief which maintained that souls transform into stars after dying. And I'll stop here because I'm afraid we may lack time and I don't want to make another 3-hour episode. So I'll stop with this chapter. Shaun, what is your comment when it comes to this well-known myth, legend, and tradition? So many old traditions and old folklores that came even before Christianity that, there's a ferryman or someone who transport the dead to the other place. Is there a way that we can somehow, maybe reconcile this with any aspect of the Bible?
I don't think that there's really any way to that we can reconcile the idea of ferrying the dead across. I don't really see that. Maybe the closest that we can come is baptism. A dead man goes in and a live man comes out. But the idea that living physical people would have to take on the job of Chiron and take them across, like I'm sorry, Charon. Chiron is the centaur. My Greek is bad. Anyway, so
Wait, are you talking about Kenta? No. You're talking about the Kerberos, right? Are you talking about Kerberos, the three-headed dog?
No. So Chiron is the wounded healer that was the teacher of Heracles. And when he had used the hydrous poison and tipped an arrow, he accidentally shot his master. And so his foot is always wounded. And so that's it goes on to he was eventually the teacher of Asclepius. And so that's kind of where that whole story comes from.
Okay, I thought you mentioned a dog or an animal.
No, I didn't. I was talking about the ferryman, Charon. So yeah, it's kind of weird, the idea that they would have, humans doing the job of like, a supernatural being. But no, I don't really see any way to reconcile that biblically. I think that just comes from pre-Christian ideas, and then the Christians just kind of borrow the imagery. As far as the idea that people who die become stars, we know that biblically the stars and the Elohim are closely related. I maybe there is something to be said about when someone dies, that if they were righteous and they're in heaven, that maybe they're related to a star. I mean, Abraham's promised that your children would be like the stars and would number as many. So I think it would be tenuous to try to make that link, but possible, right? Like who knows how these people think, and if we don't get their writings, we don't really know, and there's a lot of writings we don't have. So I think that is a possible link to the stars and the idea of the Milky Way, but that would be my best guess.
Okay, thank you. Chapter 11. Born in whatever place in 1445, a professor in Basel and Freiburg, the Strasbourg preacher Johann Geiler von Kaiserberg makes several observations about the wild hunt in his sermons. In a sermon he gave in 1508, on the Thursday following Reminiscer, he borrows the story of Noel from Vincent de Bois, whatever, but uses it only to illustrate a short preamble. And this is the story. You ask, what shall you tell us about the wild army? But I cannot tell you very much, for you know much more than I. This is what the common man says. Those who die before the time God has fixed for them, those who leave on a journey and are stabbed, hanged, or drowned, must wander after that until there arrives the date that God has set for them. Then God will do for them what is in accordance with his divine will. Those who wander are especially active during the Lenten days, and first and foremost during the lean times before Christmas, which is a sacred time, and each runs in the dress of their rank. A peasant in peasant garb, a knight as a knight, and they race therefore bound to the same rope. One holds a cross in front of him, the other a head in his hand, and says, "Make way, so God grant you life." This is the opinion of the common man, about which I know nothing, but the Speculum Historiae, book number 13, volume, speaks in two places of Charles V, King of France, who, after his death, wandered here and there with his army, paying penitence, but he found redemption thanks to the prayers of Saint Denis, and his penitence ended. The furious army is called Charlequint, but others call it just Quint. That was the story, or the sermon. That souls must wait on earth for their living time set by destiny is an ancient idea that found its way into medieval literature through Tertullian. I wonder if this is the same church father Tertullian. The preacher, this one, Johann Geiler von Kaiserberg, is the first one to introduce three important motifs: the rope, the bearer of the cross, and the herald who warns the living to keep their distance. Any comment on this? Because unfortunately I have to skip more than I talk, more than I underline. Anything when it comes to this story, which I think the most interesting part is when he mentions Charles V, the King of France, who was heard by eyewitnesses that he was still, after his death, riding with his army until he found penitence through the prayers of this guy called Saint Denis. It's an interesting story, especially how it's parallel to the Wild Hunt, because King Charles V's army didn't do anything evil, didn't attack people, didn't harass them, nothing. So he was just wandering around until his time to go back to God came. It's a very interesting story included in this minister's sermon. Any comment on that?
Yeah, so first of all, we can plainly see they didn't have a very good view of God's sovereignty. If God predestines a man to live this long and then he dies before then he's got to wander the earth until it's like, what? Are you kidding me? That's ridiculous. So that's the first thing I have to say. Second is, you see these three, the motif of these three, the rope bearer, the cross bearer, and then the herald. And one of the interesting places that you see the three intersect is in the Pied Piper, because not only is the Pied Piper binding his audience, he's also leading his audience with the crossbearer, and he is also heralding in the sense that he's playing his flute. And then what's really interesting is you eventually have the motif of the harlequin or the heliquin come back in to the Pied Piper, because after they refuse to pay, he then takes the children and crosses them all over into death. So not only is he the rope bearer, he's the cross bearer, and he's the herald, and he's the Harlequin of the Wild Hunt. And you see that these motifs all come together very very quickly. I think that that was a story from like the 1300s or 1400s in Hamelin, if I'm correct. And so this idea of like disambiguating between the party of the dead and the Wild Hunt and all this, like they have to do this very early, because those threads are already getting twisted together just a few hundred years after the stories are being told, and you start getting these later developments of stories that are combining elements. So I just think that that's really interesting, that you have those three, and they eventually all get placed into a character. And then even later than that, we have other ways of looking at that, even up to the modern day, where people would be really accustomed to seeing the characters that have all of those properties.
Thank you for that. I had to skip several pages again because of the lack of time. So we're skipping to the part of this chapter that is called defensive measures. In Hans Bachmann's adventure, the abduction takes place at the moment the man draws his sword from its scabbard and starts striking the air around him. All indicates that he thinks he can protect himself in this way against the horde of invisible spirits. This is a common reaction, for it was long believed throughout Europe that iron had the power to stop demons or send them fleeing. Drawing a circle around yourself or making the sign of the cross allowed you to remain safe. A scrutiny of 19th century folk traditions that casually commingled with the wild hunt, diabolical huntsman, and wild hunter provides us with additional methods. When the demonic horde is heard, an individual should lie beneath a harrow, cover himself with dirt, stand or lie in the right hand rut of the road, keep quiet, avoid joining in with the noises, avoid clicking his tongue, avoid saying the name of the furious army on Mondays, Wednesdays, or Fridays. Oh my gosh, it's Friday and we said wild hunt so many times. Oh no. Oopsie. Or even speaking about it. Fold his handkerchief into the shape of a cross, place his head in a cartwheel, lay down on the ground with his arms in the shape of the cross, and so on and so on. This legend of the wild hunt has evolved ceaselessly. It is alive and blend with all others that offer a point of contact. One of the keys to its evolution is the belief that purgatory is inside a mountain. This belief has brought about the merger of this legend and that of the Mountain of Venus, characterized by the presence of the loyal Eckhart as the figure who gives a warning and the localization of certain apparitions in Thuringia. I don't know where is that. We can also note the theme of the spirits of the night who enter dwellings, spirits behind whom we can distinguish the dead in medieval literature. The ritual banquet of the fairies is in reality a repast of the dead. We can also note the idea that the departed form a community and celebrate a rite at certain dates on which they appear together in a procession. The entire legend revolves around the problem of our future in the other world or beyond the grave, and what the fundamental implications of the unique status of the dead are for the living. The wild hunt is regarded as a company, a society. The wild hunt is a rite that both the living and the dead celebrate. One of the major obstacles we encounter is obviously the plethora of names for the various nightly hosts. And there's, I'll stop here because we have so many chapters to cover. So, Shaun, maybe two quick questions. We heard in the first part of these stories and examples, dude, you had to do so many things. You should not click your tongue. You should not be at the crossroad this time. You should not make any noise. You should not do this. You should not say the name of the wild hunt. How judgmental would be as the 21st century Christians to those Christians of that time? Will be like, oh, oh, you're shallow, you're stupid, you're like all like superstitious, that's all garbage. But could there be something in these stories so that we can show grace and like, well, they didn't know better. They didn't have scholars. They didn't have libraries. They had the Bible. Not everyone was able to read. So we can't judge them or consider them of less, some Christians of the second grade or second caste. It's like, like they're stupid or something like that. I think we should give them grace. So that's the first one. The second one is when we read about the, again, we come here to the mountain. We read about the purgatory. We hear about this community that is gathering there. But it's not just the army and the communion of the dead. The living can join this communion as well. And there's food, there's banquet and stuff. Now, this is my concern. This awfully reminds me of the banquet in the eschaton that Christians will have, the people of God with Christ at the final wedding. Is this a demonic perversion of that, or just because all the cultures, gather around food and drink, it's a common thing that we like to gather, it relaxes us, that's how we make friendships, that's how we hang around, we socialize. Yet in this case, it's a community that is primarily dead, but the living can also join. I don't know if I should want to join an army of dead people, dead soldiers, dead peasants, and just chat with them and try to eat or drink with them as if I'm able to do that. So the first thing, again, how graceful should we be to these superstitious, rights of the medieval Christians who try to protect themselves by doing all these things? And the second thing, is this communion of the dead a perverted version of the communion or the Eucharist, and especially the final banquet, or it's not? Maybe I'm reading too much between the lines.
Okay, there's a lot of things in this one. First of all, the idea that iron could hurt the spirits or ward off spirits and devils, that superstition is actually the reason that traditionally, even though steel was available, iron was always used in prisons. The idea that it would ward off negative spirits. And so the prisoners were placed in a block or box of iron. So firstly, I mean, I don't know what the idea behind it is, except for maybe if you go way back to the beginning of smelting iron, they didn't have the tools to be able to necessarily draw it from the earth in its ore form and then purify it. The way that they would get iron is they would look for meteors because they had high iron content, and then they would smith those. These were literally weapons from the heavens. So perhaps that's maybe the origin of that idea. Secondly, the idea of there being specific things that you do when the wild hunt is approaching. Well, I think that we would have to give them grace because we've definitely not only normalized that in our culture, but codified it in our laws. For example, you're driving down the road and you hear a raucous commotion behind you, and you look in your mirror and you see flashing lights. What do? You pull over on the right side of the road. So it's this idea of, oh, we got something coming up the road. You need to go to the right side of the road, which is exactly one of the things that they said to do. And then the third thing about the communion of the dead, I don't think that this is necessarily a counterfeit of the marriage supper of the Lamb. And the reason I don't is the marriage supper itself is drawing on older traditions. And so that's the reason that they would know what to expect, because this is something that a king did. First, there was a procession, and then you would go into the king's court, and then you would eat at the king's table. So there will be a procession. Now, the wild hunt is like that procession, but that wasn't the first procession. There's processions before that that told us what a procession was in order for us to be able to appreciate what we have in the Bible. So first a procession and then a meal. That's exactly what we see the dead doing, is you have a procession and then a meal. And then I'm not sure if it's this chapter, but one of the chapters in the book said that the living will also go and accompany the dead in order to be able to get some of the stuff that's left out. And it said that the people would even treat them like the humans that walked along with the dead, like they were superior, like they were saints or something. And I wonder if that's the origin of the tradition of wassailing, that you would go door to door on a night when the dead. So wassailing would typically happen on the 21st, 22nd, leading up to Christmas. And so I'm not sure if that correlates at all with the Ember Days that it was talking about, or Christmas Tide. I think Christmas Tide is actually after Christmas, but I could be wrong. But so going door to door and expecting them to give you something, and then we have that now in our modern trick or treating, where you go door to door and you're dressed up like something from the Army of the Dead or the Wild Hunt, and then you're expecting them to give you goodies. So we still kind of have that today. So I don't think that we should judge them so harshly. And of course, we kind of make fun of this stuff now. Like we enjoy it. It's jubilant. It's not. It's for us. It's not scary, but it is still pulling from that ancient tradition. So I think that not only should we be graceful to them, but we should be grateful for them bringing that tradition to us.
Thank you for that. Amber has a question for you. Why did they think metals stopped demons?
Like I said, I'm not sure why they thought it did. My suspicion is that prior to being able to source iron in the ore form in the ground and then break it down and then go through the process of smelting it, and then getting an ingot and all that, the way that they originally got raw iron was from meteors, because meteors had a high iron content. And so iron was literally the metal that fell from the sky. And so the idea was that this is a heavenly metal. And so things from above can defeat things from below. So I imagine that's why they thought that iron was able to combat the supernatural, because it itself was supernatural.
And I read long ago that engineers, once when the building or a house is made, intentionally sometimes made door locks and knobs made of certain type of metal, because certain metals have the ability to purify and cleanse it by itself. So you don't need to go, let's say you touch something dirty and then the doorknob. If it's made of iron or some type of metal, it has the ability to cleanse, purify itself after a while. So you don't have to go and spray it with some chemical and to clean it. With many metals, you would have to, but some metals, they have this purifying ability. So I'm wondering if there can be anything relatable to the spiritual warfare, but I don't know.
As far as I understand, the ones that can do that are copper and the copper alloys. So I think that's like bronze. So copper, bronze, and silver are the ones traditionally that are capable of doing that. And so that's why we actually use silverware. We don't use real silver to this day, but they used to. And the reason was that it had these disinfecting properties.
Cool, thank you. Okay, we're switching to chapter 12, the Wild Hunt, Masked Man. There are some that prompt doubts. Are we dealing with the dead or confronted by living men in disguise? That's the question. French and Italian researchers have pushed their investigations towards processions of masked living men that made plenty of noise. Now I have to fast forward a few pages and come to the subchapter called Masks and the Dead. This is super interesting. It has long been known that, depending on the circumstances, masks customarily represented the dead or demons. I didn't know this. The same word in many languages was used to designate both the dead and masks. For example, the Latin larva and the Lithuanian kaukas. In ancient times, commemorative feasts for the dead were accompanied by masquerades. And if we refer to the customs of a country that was converted to Christianity quite late, such as Lithuania, we can see that the dead, Veles, made up the troop of Veliona, god of the dead, and were represented by masks during solstice and carnival celebrations. We also know that the masquerades took place on precise dates connected to the solstices and equinoxes. Is that how you pronounce it? Okay, I'm sorry for that. The aim of the ritual that fell on the dates mentioned is therefore the expulsion of the harmful dead who were perceived as demons and to propitiate the other departed souls so that they contribute to the well-being of all other over the course of the year that is just beginning. I think I have more stuff about masks. That's coming in another chapter. So let's just maybe comment or summarize this section of the chapter 12 briefly, please. Masks related to the demons, and when we put masks on our faces, when if we would attend to a carnival or somewhere like, let's say, a party that everyone should wear a mask unknowingly, could this be some spiritual procession or spiritual rite or spiritual I don't want to say necessarily demonic, but spiritual event that we are unwillingly participating? Or maybe again, I'm going too much spiritual with just a mere process of someone putting mask on their face.
So I don't think that wearing a mask is particularly participating in anything that is demonic or sinister. That said, I think the reason that masks were so associated with the dead is because you don't know who it is you're talking to when they're wearing the mask. It could be anybody. And so the idea is you could be talking to somebody wearing the mask that's already passed on. The only way that you can judge them is based on their frame, and that doesn't give you much to work with. So the idea of these masquerades that were held, I wonder, I don't know, sanctified imagination. I wonder if it wasn't, in a sense, to try to stave off the finality of them being gone, because everyone's wearing masks. Any one of these bodies standing around could be your loved one talking to you. That's just my thoughts on that.
Cool. I love shorter answers because we already hour and a half. Amber has another question. I don't know what's happening with Amber tonight. Were they literal masks? Yes. Yes. Okay. I love this answer. We both agree. Short answer, move on. Cool. Thanks. Okay. Chapter 13, The Wild Hunt in Scandinavia. I have this and another short chapter, and then we'll be committing the last segment of the episode to Odin. And could he be the leader of this wild hunt army? The northern countries, Norway in particular, offer a theme that seems to have come directly from the night hosts we have been examining. Here, the wild hunt is known as Oskoreia, or the terrifying ride. This host is a troupe of masked men or spirits that ride horses between Christmas and Epiphany or Santa Lucia Day. Hence, another name for the wild hunt, Luciferdi. Very interesting. The host traveled through the air or paraded over the ground and is characterized by two essential motifs: a connection to horses and an association with food and drinks. The first motive brings to mind what we read in the accounts provided by 13th century authors. During the cycle of the 12 days, spirits slip into the stables and abduct horses, returning them later covered with sweat, as if they had been galloping and ridden hard for a long time. It is said that the members of Oskoreia or Lucy have ridden these horses. The second motive is the theft of food, especially drink. The Oskoreians slipped into houses and cellars and stole the food and emptied the kegs of beer, which they refilled with water. But if we bring to mind the Friulian Benedenti and the werewolves of the Baltic, this was a fraternity of men who work for the power of good, as testified by Olaus Magnus, Bishop of Uppsala, who said the following: in Prussia, Latvia, and Lithuania live a large number of these magicians. On Christmas night, after leaving their human shape for that of a wolf, they gather in a place they have selected in the village, where they then enter the cellars of the peasants and empty the casks of beer and wine, and then strangle the livestock. Okay, I'll skip this a little bit. Okay, from the Middle Ages to the end of the 19th century, it was believed throughout Europe that a troop roamed about in the winter that would enter houses for drink and sustenance. The Deacon Christoph Arnold, born near Nuremberg in 1627, speaks of a Christmas customs of the Lapps, Lapps. This is the quote. They would erect representations of the spirits of the dead because during the time they believed that the majority of ghosts and spirits traveled through the air and they wished to conciliate them through sacrifice. They keep a piece of what they have eaten, placing it in a piece of birch bark, and if it were a small boat, they place a sail and oars on it. Then they pour in a little fatty broth, and then they hang the entire assemblage to a tree behind the house, so then this army has something to eat. Okay, so I'm at least glad in this form of the story in Scandinavia that when it comes to the wild hunt and this army of the dead, that basically what they want to do, they want to eat and drink, but they don't want to hurt people. They break your cellars, they break into your basements. They want to drink alcohol. It doesn't say if you will be welcome as a human being, and if they would eat someone, it will be your livestock. So they will still do damage, but it wouldn't attack humans. It wouldn't attack the family. And now we see that in some portions of Scandinavia, because Scandinavia is huge, we'll see that these beings could actually be a type of werewolves that were actually magicians who would do astral projections, show as werewolves, eat and drink, and then leave these places. I mean, now this is so much packed. Like in this couple of short stories, we see so many different type of legends and lores. They're like merging into one. Magicians, werewolves, army of the dead, the wild hunt, all of this packed into one story. I have no clue how to put them all together. And if I didn't read this chapter, I wouldn't even know that these things can be all connected. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so first of all, wolf magicians, I mean, we have Skinwalker right there. So like that's basically the European version of a Skinwalker. Secondly, if they're breaking into your house, they're eating your food stores, they're drinking all your beer and killing your livestock, they have effectively killed you. Remember, this is the 12 days of Christmas between Christmas and Epiphany, right? So nothing grows. You're in Scandinavia. They've eaten all your food, drinking all your beer, which was not brewed for the intoxicating properties. It was brewed for the nutritional properties and the fact that it was preservable in casks. So they ate your food, they drank your beer, and ate your livestock. You're dead. Like you're not going to survive the winter. You were this close, and you missed it. So yeah, I mean, even though like reading it, it's like, oh yeah, they're just kind of going around and having a good time. We have to remember they couldn't go to the grocery store. Not in the 13th century. There was no grocery store to go to. And dead of winter, Norway. Yeah, that is, you don't want to be outside. Nothing grows, and all your animals are now dead. And you don't even have beer, which was basically liquid bread, and it was very thick. You don't even have beer to get through the night. So yeah, you're gonna freeze to death.
Amber said that is very rude of the dead. Yes, indeed. So wait, you're saying they didn't have Aldi's, they didn't have IKEA, they couldn't just assemble stuff, they couldn't just go and buy. And when it comes to beer, I feel bad because beer would make them warm in the nighttime. So taking a beer from you, if someone would come and take my beer, my Stella Artois from my fridge, I would think that's worse than just taking my food. I'm like, dude, this is where you cross the line. I'm coming up to you because you took my beer. That's it.
So it's interesting when you research it. It's actually the Christian monks who first developed beer. Now, not to say they first developed the first alcoholic beverage. Pagans had that forever, but the idea of the beer having the nutritional yeast in it, like that was the Christian monks, and it wasn't to get them tanked. It was just to be able to have food that you could preserve and they would drink beer. And so there are recipes for that involve beer and meat. There are oh, what was it? They were just talking about it. They were the I can't remember which monks they are, but they're the ones who first perfected the beer recipe, and then they just recently stumbled upon it going through the libraries. And I wish I would have remembered which ones they were. But so they just recently stumbled upon it, and so they're going to start brewing that again. But they have recommendations of, drink so much beer a night for like optimal nutritional health. And so beer was actually prescribed almost medicinally. And there were war rations where you were actually given like a gallon of beer a day to be able to drink. Now, this is obviously because it was not as alcoholic as what we think today. And it was a way of having calories that were easily accessible. And when you don't have clean water, you got to have something to drink. So, but yeah, beer was given to, in war rations, it was given to people as something that they needed.
Thank you. Yeah, and Amber made a nice parallel. She says beer was also like that Egyptian liquid bread was slave food. Yeah, thanks for that info. Okay, we're switching to chapter 14 and then Odin. 14 is called the passage of the wild hunt. We can bring the appearance of the wild hunt down to three major time periods: winter, Holy Week, and summer. The dates in winter are staggered from St. Martin's Day, which is November 11th, to the Chair of St. Peter, February 22nd, with two periods of high holidays, Advent and the 12 days separating Christmas and Epiphany. Okay, let me quickly mention something when it comes to the Feast of the Chair of St. Peter. So this feast, which was in February 22nd, replaced the ancient ceremony of the parentes or dies parentales, an expression of ancestor worship. Furthermore, we have seen that one of the names of the wild hunt's leader is Goi, G-O-I. As it happens, Goi was the name of the fifth month of winter for the ancient Scandinavians, and it fell at the end of what is now February or the beginning of March. When the new year was still celebrated on March 1, Goi was marked by rites to expel winter, purification rituals, and commemorations of the dead. This corresponded almost exactly to the Greek Antherestia, during which the dead were given free rein and permission to invade this world, and to the Roman Lupercalia, whose purpose was to purify the city and drive away the demons responsible for sickness, sterility, and poor harvests. Then when it comes to the day and hour of the troops' passage, the time is sometimes specified as being between 11 o'clock and midnight, or between midnight and 1 in the morning. I was honestly hoping they will mention 3 o'clock because of the witching hour, and when I saw they didn't, I was so disappointed. Latvian folk song offer us some invaluable information in this regard. The dead make their way to the other world successfully by being buried before noon, the hour that marks the beginning of the setting of the sun and the transition to twilight. The day is rarely indicated, and when it is Saturday, a day that conveys the idea of the Sabbath that attests to connection between our theme and that of the flight of the witches. When it comes to the common denominator, if we look for it in all these dates, we see that they all indicate key times of the year that involve changes, ends, or beginnings. In short, they're all transitional periods. Skip this. Okay, I think I'm also going to skip oracles, taboos, huntings, libations, and feasts. But it says that basically in one way or another, the wild hunt fell into the vast complex of ancestor worship, the cult of the dead, who are the go-betweens between man and the gods. Shaun, any comment when it comes to all these times and dates and just different holidays where it almost may seem to be, especially when it comes to the medieval people, they thought that certain dates and certain times were where the spiritual realms will be almost like, there's no boundary between them. Like it will be more easier for the spirits to come in our realm on certain days and time. Um, Again, what I don't think we can give some solid biblical explanation for this, but in all of our reading and dissecting different supernatural and paranormal stories in the last couple of years, what is it to say about this chapter?
So most of the time, I would say that the people who are saying like, "Hey, these are the areas in which areas of the calendar in which the dead can cross over," I'd say that it's because of this idea of the procession of the dead, and as we had in what we had read, I don't know if we covered it here, but in what we had read, um, most of the time there were empty horses at the back, or horses that didn't have a rider, and the idea was that the procession of the dead were coming to collect the dead. And so the idea that the dead can cross over this veil during these times is probably because these are the periods of times where people would most often die, where sickness would come in. Maybe these were the days where you had to stay inside because it was going to get so cold, or maybe this was the beginning of the rainy season. And the idea was, hey, if you survive from this window to this window, you're probably good for this year. So I'm assuming that that's probably where the idea came from. Now, as far as the dates are concerned, there's a lot of people who throw shade at Christians because, oh, well, you just took this pagan holiday and made it a Christian holiday. Well, yeah, duh. That's how calendars work, right? So these were agrarian people. They needed to have certain times that were set apart to know, hey, this is when we do this, and this is when we do this, and here's how we mark time in between. So yeah, they're not going to have like a dirty pagan deity day. They're going to have a Christian day, and so they're going to take the same day because they're planting in the same fields in the same area. Of course, they're going to use the same days. They're just going to rename them because they're not dirty pagans.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, now we're switching, let's say the last 20 to 30 minutes max to the last three chapters, which have to deal with Odin. Chapter 15, Scholars and the Tradition. Although many German researchers have long shown that the incorporation of the leader of the wild hunt into Odin rests on flimsy foundations, these reasonable voices have gone unheard because they contradict a general tendency to discover mythological survivals in folk traditions, cost what it may. Furthermore, a number of older studies are conductive to error because they make no clear distinctions between the diabolical huntsman, the wild huntsman, the cursed huntsman, and the furious army. We begin by briefly retracting the development of these studies since the time of Jacob Grimm. In Quest of a German Mythology, Jacob Grimm studied the theme of the cursed huntsman, which he compares to the Messni Harlequin, known as the Furious Army and the Wild Army in the regions east of the Rhine River. Have to listen to our last episode, previous Friday, because it gives context. We cover first 7 chapters, so it will give you context for what we are covering now. Starting in 1835, he sees in its leader a form of Odin that had been downgraded by Christianity to the rank of a ghostly figure. Following in his footsteps, J.W. Wolf recognizes feature of Donar or Thor, different spelling, different pronunciation in different regions, in this figure. Julius Lippert, who lived by the end of 19th century, offers a new hypothesis. The fuel kernel of the theme is the belief in the soul's survival after death, a proposition that fits well with the fact that the dead make up the furious army, which is repeated by W. Golther, also by the end of 19th century, although he refuses to make Odin the leader of this nocturnal host. In 1998, L. Leistner tackles the problem from another angle. He suggests that the wild hunt is the result of dreams condensed into a leg-end-like form. Leg-end-like form. In his thesis published in Leipzig in 1914, Hans Plischke creates a kind of synthesis of his predecessor's theories without taking a stand in favor of any one of them. And this is the thesis. The furious army is rooted in beliefs concerning the soul, then meteorological conditions, and dreams. In 1934, A. Endner, another author, develops an animist theory underscoring the role played by the dead in ancient and primitive beliefs. Carl Meisen's thesis is simple. The infernal hunt is the expression of the Christian dogma of the punishment of the soul of the person who has committed reprehensible acts. Without the punitive system, we can seek the origin of the infernal ghost army, this troop of the damned, led by the devil and his satellites. Meissner acknowledges that the root of this religion originates in ancestor worship in classical antiquity, but he does not deal with this matter with any greater precision. Older researchers note that hiding behind the Hel or Harlequin is certainly the Herla, King Herla, who has different variations and names in different regions, but the interpretation of Fingus and Queen have Queen as Quin have given rise to the wildest hypotheses, those evoking the word king and that are incompatible with philological laws, as clearly demonstrated by H. N. Flasdyke. People have tried to see in Harlequin the king of hell, or the child of hell, and the king of alders. Otto Hoffler, student of R. Muck, a fine representative of the Vienna mythological school, postulates the so-called the priority of the ecstatic worship of the mythic legend. For him, the Furious Army complex is the reflection of secret German ecstatic cults, the reflection of rites binding warriors within a brotherhood, placed beneath the aegis of Odin, whose recognition sign is the mask. Again, we are going back to the mask. It involves a warrior aristocracy that had social and religious duties closely connected to the dead, because its members were initiated by means of a mock death. These fraternities would have been mistaken for armies of the dead by the non-initiated who caught sight of them. This is what Otto Hoffler seeks to demonstrate, chiefly relying on a passage by Tacitus, in which the Roman historian says that the Harii, Harii, painted their bodies black in order to pass for an army of the dead. Otto Hoffler shows 30 points common to the Furious Army and to the masked processions that mark the winter equinox, some of which allow the participants to go into a trance, leave their bodies, and transform into the entities whose masks they wore. In other words, the dead. According to Otto Hoffler, the myth of the Furious Army has its socio-religious counterpart in the rite of the warrior societies. Hence, its roots should be sought in their actions. In 1980, a disciple of Otto Hoffler, Christine Eike, published an extensive study on the Oskoreia, the name for the Mesni Harlequin in Norwegian folk tradition that picked up on the trance theory, noting that the manifestation of the winter night's troops seemed to reflect phenomena such as forming doubles or doppelgangers, I would add, well known in shamanic traditions. This finally explains why it is logical for Odin to have been made the leader of the troop, because he was considered the quote-unquote god of ecstasy. I didn't know this. Shaun, I'll stop here with this chapter, and I'll leave two more for the end. So again, not even the scholars know who was the leader of this army. The conclusion would change from country to country, since Europe is not that small. And we see here that, like, for some people it could be Odin, but for many it's not. Or rather, we would see how, again, with so many stories, with so many oral traditions in every country in the world, we see here how legends and folktales would evolve and change or be adapted. Or like the author of the book is upset. He says, oh yeah, and you can see sometimes how stories would evolve and have Christian or more religious elements of repentance, God's, supposed punishment, and so forth and so forth. But here, when we speak about Odin, and then connection with the masks and how he was known as the god of ecstasy, what is it that we can maybe correlate, between the army of the dead and Odin, at least when it comes to Scandinavian parts?
So Odin is it's there's a lot. Um, Odin was not the original chief of the gods in the Norse pantheon. That was Tyr. Thor, the Thunderer, was the one who rode across the sky in his chariot, drugged by the goats. Also, something else we didn't say during this episode, but something we read in the book, was that there is a tradition that if you eat an animal, don't break any of its bones, and place it in its skins, then a good woman, part of the procession, will come by with a staff in one hand and an apple in the other, touch the animal, and it'll come back to life. And it's part of a shamanic tradition. Thor does the exact same things with his goats. So the idea of Thor being equated to the wild hunt, also he is someone who's constantly eating boar, which is something that you hunt. Odin doesn't ever eat anything. He drinks wine, and that's basically it. The other gods are very jubilant. Odin is not. The Odin kind of came in to the pantheon. He's not even actually from the Norse pantheon. He came into the pantheon relatively late. He was used as explanatory power for how the runes came to be. We know that the runic system began in about 250 AD, so relatively late, after there were already bishops preaching Christianity in the Northlands. And of course, you have this god who sacrifices himself to himself in order to descend into the underworld and bring back the words of power. That sounds like Jesus, who died on the cross as a propitiating sacrifice to the Father, went to the underworld and then came back, and now we have the Gospels, which contain the words of everlasting life. Odin is totally a ripoff of Jesus, 100%. He also was originally the god of death, not the god of war. Tyr is the god of war. You don't need two gods of war. He was originally the god of death. Odin started changing probably around the 5th century, and that's really when you start to see the first depictions of him. He wasn't even depicted before. We have hammers all over the place going way back. We don't see any depiction of Odin. Not any painting, not any rock, nothing until around the 5th century. Which would make sense if the runes came around in 250 and then you later needed an explanation for how you got them. You get Odin. And the idea of these people who needed to go into this frenzy in order to go to war, of course, they're going to look to Odin as he's the guy, right? But that really wasn't necessary until you had people coming into their territory. Who were the people coming into their territory? Oh, that was the Franks and the Saxons as they were expanding their territory. These were Christian nations. So it wasn't until the Christianization of the continent that Northern Europeans started seeing this people pushing in. This whole kind of pagan idea that, Odin, father of the gods, chief of the gods, that's really a reaction to Christianity. It's not original to the northern gods. And really, if you look, there really is no equivalent to Odin in any of the other pantheons. Now, Tacitus says that their chief god was like Mercury. Well, that is, first of all, that's nothing like Odin. But secondly, there was originally another god that was a chief god, and his symbol was the masts that they use on Viking warships that go up like a T. And that was the symbol of this god. And I honestly forget the name of the god, but it's one that doesn't even have pride of place by the time that Snorri Sturluson is writing. He's not even mentioned in the pantheons. So, yeah, I can see why he is in some places placed as the head of the hunt, because he took on the role of being the god of death and the wild hunt and all these things. By that time, it was there was an equivocation between the hunt and the procession of the dead. But if there was an original god of the wild hunt, it would have been Thor.
Wow, thank you for all that encyclopedic knowledge and info. I enjoyed. Okay, we're switching to chapter 16, the Indo-European roots of the wild hunt. One of the principal arguments made by scholars in favor of Odin as the leader of the wild hunt is the motif of the storm. It opens the door to the Indo-European world. In the majority of post-medieval traditions, the passage of the wild hunt was connected to atmospheric conditions. This was also true of stories about ghosts or abnormal deaths, which would be normal for an extremely ancient notion linked the soul to pneuma or pneuma, the breath. Therefore, when souls moved on, the wind rose. This immediately caused a problem. The same was said as the passages of the cursed huntsman, the wild huntsman, animal ghosts, this is something new. Then unbelievable packs of all kinds, the phantom coach, and the flight of witches. We must therefore treat the motive with caution, for we are unable to know in what sense the borrowing had been carried out, or even if the motive is original. Furthermore, researchers have long felt that the wild hunt undoubtedly had an Indo-European origin, because in ancient India we find a troop that is apparently akin to it. In the Atlas of Swiss Ethnology, Elizabeth Liebel provides a synthesis of the relationship between the wild hunt and the weather. The passage of souls in perdition heralded bad weather. The apparition of the, can't pronounce this, this is one of the Scandinavian languages, I'll try. So the apparition of the Turstageg was accompanied by the roar of thunder and bolts of lightning. And when a strong autumn gale blows or a heavy winter storm rages, people in Switzerland say that the Turst is still on the hunt. People also say that as if the Turst was hunting. In another region, the passage of the riders of the furious army is accompanied by rumblings. When the Waldhuli blows his horn, the weather is going to turn foul. On stormy nights, the Grand Duke leads the wild army. The oldest accounts go back to the 16th century, which is not honestly very old. Before this time, we find essentially the motive of noise, the tumult, I don't know what is this, that undoubtedly may have inspired the hunt's connection to that of the tempest. This is the case with Luque la Maudit, which basically translated means look the cursed, of Bourdet, which was written in 13th century, in which the random wandering of the devils of Harlequin across the countryside recalls the passage of a tornado. Swirling about, the devils uproot trees and knock them down during the course of their frolics, cause the waves of the river to rise, pulverize a tower, and destroy the chimneys of the inhabitants of the nearby town. Describing a tournament, the anonymous author of some work, which was in about the year 1300, talks of the rising clamor of shouts and screams. He compares them to the sound of thunder and says that the din resembles that of the furious army. The Chronicle of Normandy recounts the story of Richard the Fearless, who lives with Mesny Charles Quint, who lives with this person. The locution shows that we should take tempest in the sense of din, quote unquote, din. From the 16th century on, the terms regularly used to describe the nightly hosts were gedos, Gedoss, or din again. Then some other words, which you don't have to read, which would basically mean to howl, to rumble, to roll, to roar, to breathe violently, and similar. Then there is another story from another place, which we will skip for now because it's a lot. When exploring the relationship between folk beliefs and paganism, W. Schwartz observes that the theme of the curse hunter existed among other Indo-European peoples and suggested we view natural phenomena such as tempests and storms as the root of the portrayal. On the basis of these studies, some researchers have compared the wild hunt to the god Indra. So to god Indra, the troop of the Maruts, as Jan Gonda describes. So some scholar Jan Gonda describes, and this is his quotation. Larger and powerfully strong and dreadful in appearance, they cleave the air over the mountain and hill, armed with their glittering spears. Amid admirable and irresistible, they travel in their sparkling golden chariots. It's funny because you were just mentioning Thor going in chariots, which is a copy of Baal, which is a copy of Yahweh. So funny. Pulled by red-roan horses or gazelles, all tremble before them, even the earth and the mountains. They cleave the rock and cause solid ground to tremble. Coming from heaven, they give birth to wind, lightning, and rain. The urine of their steeds is like the rain. Wow. There are more stories, and I'll have to skip them, unfortunately. There's more comparison between these ancient stories with the Indian traditions. Again, I would suggest you buying the book. Oh, there are some flaws in this theory that the Mauruts and the ancestors of the wild hunt. Odin, the somber, binding magician god, did not correspond to Indra, which was the counterpart of god Tyr, Tyr, but instead to Varuna, and the Romans identified him with Mercury. His connection to agrarian considerations is relatively recent, as clearly demonstrated by Jan de Vries, another scholar whom we just mentioned a few minutes ago. In addition, thunder and lightning were attributed of the god Thor and his hammer Mjolnir. In the 11th century, Adam of Bremen writes the following: He rules in the air, commanding lightning and thunder, and the wind and the rain, and sunshine and fruits. When epidemics and famines threaten, sacrifices are made to the idol Thor. That was the quote. In northern Sweden, the peasants called Thor the god farmer. The good farmer, the good fellow of wheat and the fields. Thor appears here as god of the third function, which is fertility. In fact, in Vedic India, Vayu, Vayu, resembles the leader of the wild hunt most closely. He's the god of wind and storms and leads a troop of the dead. Even taking into account all the slips and deviations, the substitutions of duties, the confusion of different gods, and the phenomena that mythologies give more than one god the same attribute, we still run headlong into a major obstacle. Weather is connected to Thor and not Odin. Nevertheless, Odin is a complex god who rebuts all simplistic definitions. He has appropriated to himself the attributes of the agrarian gods, the gods ruling fertility, and the gods of the dead. Hence, we can detect many overlaps. It is possible he belongs to the wild hunt, but it is impossible to say whether this has been the case since the beginning or if he entered this legend much later, just like you mentioned 10 minutes ago. And for now, I will have to skip this chapter so we can go to the last one. But yeah, I think you already said a lot of these things, a lot of your comment in advance before I start reading, this chapter. So basically, we're here coming to the point where, hey, Thor is actually the even more important deity than Odin, and even more actually in some Indian mythologies, there are gods who resemble the leader of the wild hunt even better, not just than Odin, but even Thor. Any comment that you didn't say a while ago that you would like to add?
Yeah, so it's interesting when you're looking at the Proto-Indo-European language and the phonetics. Indra was originally, they think, Indura, which then you have there's a separation of gods. You have Du and Thor, and then that travels. Du goes up to become Zeus in Greece, and Tu in Germany. That's only later in Germany and in England he's known as Tu, but up in Scandinavia he's called Tyr, and it looks like that brings back the Du and the Dur, but the Dur continues on as Donar and then later as Thor. So you actually have the one god who breaks up into two different deities, but Tu was the leader of the gods, and Thor was the most important of the gods. You basically had Tyr, who was the god of the nobles, and Thor, which was the god of the farmers, because he's the one that brought the weather. So I just thought that was really interesting that you have Indra that ends up getting broken up into two gods that recombines in the Germanic lands, which is just amazing.
Thank you for that comment, and thank all of our friends for their kind comments and good questions in the last couple of hours. Last chapter for today, two hypotheses. In Norway, the first mention of Odin as the leader of a troop of the damned, which is not called anything close to the Furious Army or the Wild Hunt, appears in the Dream Song, the narrative by the visionary Olaf Asteson. Odin was here regarded as a devil by clerics, and I can understand the author's, impatience because, whatever he compares, whatever a chapter he covers, he's always like, those damn Christian clerics and monks in the medieval times, they saw everything as devilish and demonic. But we already talked about it.
Can I really quick here interject? This was a god who sacrificed his own eye for wisdom, killed himself on a tree, and demanded every 9 years 9 human sacrifices in Uppsala. What else would you call that but a demon? Like, literally, what else? He was also the king of the Draugar, which are the wandering dead. Like, of course you're going to call that a demon. That's just calling it what it is.
Yeah, thank you for that. I didn't know that, all these details about Odin. We can find the first instance of Odin's name in connection to the Wild Hunt in Nicholas Grice's Mirror of the Anti-Christian Papacy and Lutheran Christianity, printed in 1593, quite a bit later. Nicholas criticizes ancient pagan rites that were intended to petition the false god Odin for a good harvest in the coming year. Nicholas adds, and this is the quote, "This idolatry persisted under the papacy among many, among many peasants in the form of superstitious customs and invocations of Odin at harvest time, for the pagans believed that this same diabolical huntsman made his presence known in the fields at the time of the harvest." Dude, I like this guy who has the same name like me. He wasn't playing, he was just warning people, but he wasn't like some legalistic or condemning jerk. I don't see this in the quotation. He was exposing the false god Odin and warning the people. We owe Johans, whose last name I can't pronounce, but it starts with L, professor of history and jurisprudence at Uppsala University in Sweden, for the second mention of Odin. In his Suebo Gotland Antiquities in 1654, he tells how the Norse made Odin the god of war, and that a persistent old superstition widespread among the common folk said that, quote, "if any specter shows itself at evening or in the night on horseback or armed and accompanied by a loud din, people say that it is Odin passing through," end quote. We find repeated here that the theme of the phantom army and the basis for its comparison to the Wild Hunt rests on the terms such as specter and din. As an enthusiastic philologist, Schaffes points out that Odin means tumult. Is that how it's pronounced? Tumult? Tumult? I don't know.
I think it's tumult, but tumult sounds right too. Tumultuous is so we'll just say tumult.
Yeah. So that Odin means tumult or din, and that the Germans today call this the Furious Army, which amounts to Wodan/Odin and his minions. In fact, Wodan or Odin does not mean tumult or din, but fury. Yet the attribution of the Wild Hunt to Odin or Wodan stems from this error. The identification of this god with the leader of the phalanx of the night rests on the erroneous philological deductions, the work of scholars reinterpreting certain pagan customs. A book by Johann Peter Schmidt appeared in 1742 in the Baltic port of Rostock and established a bridge between the tradition of northern Germany. Schmidt therefore hunts in folks' beliefs for what he needs to support his investigation of the vestiges of paganism, and he makes some bold comparison by using the various spellings of the name Odin in the Germanic countries, which would be Odin with two N's, Odin, Goden, Odin, Wodan, which is similar because in In Slavic mythology, we also have Woden, but here it's spelled with W. In Serbian and Slavic mythology, it's Woden with regular V. And it's funny because Voda is water, so he'll be the god of water. But that's in Slavic. In German, I don't know if Woden with W would also be a god of that deals with water. I don't know that. He's not even aware that he includes a woman in these comparisons. Gore with two O's, a name that in fact is very likely a deformation of war with two O's, again, WOOR. In Denmark, Odin was incorporated into the Wild Huntsman around the 18th century and appeared for the first time in the writings of the priest Frederick Monrad. And we'll skip this lengthy quotation. Okay, this is repeating how the Wild Hunt was possibly the image of brotherhood that consisted of masked warriors, and then now he's going to Spain and some other countries and seeing, quoting their stories. We'll skip that. I'm just looking for something that still has to do with Odin. Okay, we come to the end. If we attempt a hypothetical timeline of the facts, we end up with this 5 stuff, and we'll be almost done. First, according to the ancestral belief, the dead roamed the earth on certain dates and played an important role in the happiness of the living because they governed fertility and prosperity. 2, to honor them, propitiate them, or protect ourselves from them, we formed societies such as brotherhoods, fraternities, and so forth that depicted them or mimicked them by means of masks and disguises. This action derived from ancestor worship and held an important social function. 3, distinct entities. Originally, these 2 troops, one of the departed and other of disguised living men, became confused with each other, and people no longer drew any distinction between them, instead regarding each of the other and vice versa. 4, the fraternity of the living was thus cultish in nature, and its members, as much as we can deduce from the traditions examined, were a kind of elect who possessed the gift of being able to divide into doubles or doppelgangers, which allowed them, among other things, to foresee death and to move quite quickly like the wind. And 5, this company, more or less Christianized over the course of its historical evolution, lost its ties to Dumezil's 3rd function, which was fertility, if I remember, and became purely funerary in nature. It took responsibility for burying the dead it sought. Here, elements are far from clear because, according to Vicente Risco's investigation, the burial seemed virtual. The Brotherhood did not abduct the true corpse, but instead it took its double or the doppelganger. And here we finally end with all these 17 chapters. Chapter 18 is concluding thoughts, which we will not attack. Shaun, this has been a wild ride when it comes to the Wild Hunt. As we've seen, there's so many different theories. Who is the leader of this Wild Hunt army? And again, as we go towards, if we will rewind 2 hours ago and start when we started the episode, we were talking about the Wild Hunt, which was the name of the Witcher 3 video game, for me the best game of all times. So the leader of the Wild Hunt in the games and maybe in the novels, I have all the novels, I didn't read them yet, was Eredin Glass. So we have Eredin Glass, we have Odin, we have all these different, we have some kings, like Herla. We have all these different interpretations. Some of these kings and rulers were fine and righteous, some were wicked. Basically, it's impossible to find one core true story because stories merged and evolved over time. Okay, I'll give you some concluding thoughts, but if you can please tell us what is the book and what is the topic that we'll be covering next Friday, so we can announce this in advance for the audience. And also the second thing, I just want to invite everyone to come this Sunday, where Dane and I will be talking about Jesus' divinity from the Gospel of Mark. And if someone will say, well, why is that important? 2 reasons. Many atheists or skeptics and many Muslims attack Jesus' divinity because they go to the oldest gospel, which is understood by many scholars to be the Gospel of Mark. And if you take the shorter version of chapter 16, which is the last chapter, it ends only within several verses where you don't see resurrected Jesus. The longer ending of Mark's gospel is said to be edited later. Even if that's true, I don't know if that's 100% true. I think so because most scholars teach so. But even if that's 100% true, we have gazillion examples in Mark's gospel that Jesus is divine, that Jesus is the God of the Bible. And because Muslims don't say it, they will say, no, open the Bible and show me where God said, where Jesus says, I'm God, bow down to me and worship me. They want the exact passage, which of course will be silly and it doesn't exist. Yet we will dissect and exegete so many passages, Dane and me, and that will be the episode of this Sunday. But Shaun, can you please tell us what is the topic in the book that we'll be covering next Friday? And if you can give the overall concluding thoughts to this book, please.
All right. So what we're going to be doing next week is the book called The Demonologist, and it is about Ed and Lorraine Warren and their life, their ministry of dealing with the poltergeist phenomenon and demonic infestations of certain properties. And they're obviously the ones that the Conjuring movie was based on. So we're going to have just a great time going through some of their what should we call it, their endeavors going into these different places, investigating, they bringing in the clergy in order to perform certain blessings and rites. So that will be awesome. I'm sure it'll bring a lot of people because they are very popular in the paranormal community. Unfortunately, Lorraine recently passed away a couple of years ago, and of course Ed was years before that, but they left their haunted museum, and so I believe it's their son-in-law that still runs it, and people can go and visit it to this day. And of course, that's where Annabelle is in their haunted museum. So if you've heard of the Annabelle doll or seen the Conjuring movies, the doll still exists and it's still in a glass case. Second thing I wanted to say is I remembered the name of the god that was the chief god in Germany that Tacitus was writing on, the god of magic, and it is actually the god that Germany is named after. The god's name is Hermann, which is a cognate for Herman, like from Mount Herman. So that's interesting. The third thing that I wanted to say, kind of wrapping up all this, and as I kind of teased earlier, I had this idea of how this idea of the wild hunt and all of these elements kind of come together and bring themselves into the modern era. And so the wild hunt is this band or party that's going and making raucous noise and traveling the countryside and kind of collecting those who are unsuspecting, and they get roped into being part of this procession. So there is a traveling band that travels around the country and brings people there, and you'll see all kinds of weird and disturbing things, and they make all kinds of noise and have all kinds of lights, and it's the traveling circus. And it's interesting because the name Harlequin was, when translated over into French and then brought back to Italian, changed to Harlequin. And Harlequin, there in the Renaissance, there were plays of Harlequin and clown, and eventually Harlequin and clown ended up being combined into one, and it was this multicolored pied suit person that was a mixture between supernatural power and slapstick comedy, and that evolved into the clown that we have today. Now, if you go to a circus, you'll see there's a ringleader that captures your attention, enthralls the audience, and there's all sorts of sounds and sights and smells, and you'll see all sorts of things that seem to defy reality. This is the essence of the wild hunt and of the procession of the dead, and it seems to be a place outside of place, a time outside of time. And I think that this is our culture's modern instantiation of the myth of the wild hunt. So if you get a chance, go to a circus and participate in the world history of the wild hunt coming to a location near you.
Thank you so much for that conclusion. And again, yeah, I'll see you in less than 48 hours dissecting the Gospel of Mark and Jesus' divinity with with Dane. Then, as Shaun was saying, we'll have this amazing episode with um, demon possession and all of those eyewitness stories and investigations next Friday. And the following Sunday, it will be a surprise guest and surprise topics. You'll have to stay with us so you can listen. Shaun, thank you so much. God bless, and God bless everyone either watching live or watching tomorrow, days to come. Take care.